Hello everybody, how are you doing tonight? Can everybody hear me and see my screen okay? Alright, thank you George. I'll wait just another minute or two and let everybody show up, and then we will get started. Tonight we will be talking about PHP programming, and we have quite a bit to cover tonight. In case you did not receive the link for the guidebook, I will enter that into the chat area for you now. I'm actually going to enter in a page that it won't go directly to the guidebook, but it will actually go to a page for this entire coaching session. And on that page, you can find the guidebooks and the recordings for all of the sessions that I have done. And tomorrow, I'll be adding the recording for tonight's session onto that. And then before next week's webinar, that same page will be used to add the guidebook as well. So this should help to put everything all into one place for you guys, so you don't have to have all these different pages for the guidebooks and for the recordings and so on. All right, it looks like people are rolling in here pretty good now. How's everyone doing tonight? All you new guys, can everybody hear me okay and see my screen? All right, cool. We've got at least a couple yeses here. The training for tonight is pretty long. If you have taken a look at my guidebook for this evening, it is actually 35 pages instead of the 20 to 25 pages that I've had for previous weeks. So there is a lot to talk about here, but I also tried to explain things very thoroughly for you in that guidebook. Just in case you have any questions later on, you should be able to refer back to that and learn anything that you need to learn that you may have missed over the course of tonight. I'm going to start out with some PHP basics tonight and move on through that stuff, teach you guys a few different things about the programming language, and then I'm going to actually get into a real-life example at the end of tonight's session and actually show you guys how to pull all of the concepts that I've talked about, not just today but also previous weeks, how to pull them all together into one single page so you can use HTML and CSS and PHP all together to make interactive websites for your visitors instead of just static websites that have text on them. Let me go ahead and pull up a web page for you guys here so I can get started this evening. Now, I'm going to be doing all of this inside of WordPress. If you remember me talking about it, this was in the freebie webinar that I did before this course, but I've included a link for that in the weekly reminder for you guys. I talked to you about installing a plugin called execphp. This plugin allows you, right here, you can see it, execphp. It allows you to run your PHP coding within your WordPress pages. Now, almost everything that I'm going to do tonight could actually be done outside of WordPress, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to be doing all this in WordPress for you guys because I know most of you use WordPress, and even if you don't, this is the easiest way that I can show you the actual coding and then show you the live result from that coding as quickly as possible. Now to start out with, I'm just going to go through a couple of the basics of PHP real quick. Whenever you want to do PHP coding, just like with HTML tags, for example, with PHP you also need to use an opening and a closing tag. Now up here at the top is my opening tag, and down here at the bottom is my closing tag. Anything that is between these two tags will be my PHP coding. Now this allows me to build websites that use both PHP coding and HTML coding all together. And so these tags are basically a way that the browser can recognize what type of coding you are using at any given point in time. One more thing that I want to show you real quick is commenting your PHP coding. If you add 2 forward slashes at the beginning of a line of PHP coding, you can type any text that you want to afterwards and simply make comments for yourself. Now, when people visit your live websites, they won't see these comments. So you could simply make notes for yourself to remind yourself of what your coding is doing. This is especially handy if you're new to PHP programming and maybe you can't glance at a bunch of code and immediately tell what it does. You can simply write little reminders for yourself as you go through your coding and simply say, you know, this function does this for my code. And write yourself little notes, and as long as you have these 2 forward slashes at the beginning of your line, then this will not actually get processed. This is simply a note for yourself. Now, in addition to using 2 lines, you can also use 1 forward slash and a star, and then another forward slash with a star as a closing. You see I have an opening and a closing right here. Anything in between these tags right here will also be comments. So if you have a lot more than just 1 line of stuff that you want to write out, you can use these tags so you don't have to keep using the double forward slash in front of every single line that you're simply using to write yourself some notes. Now, getting into some actual PHP coding for you guys now. To start out with, I need to teach you about one of the most basic things in PHP programming, and that is a variable. Now, a variable is, you can think of it like an HTML tag in the way that it has a name. I have given this one the name of A. This could actually be any name that I come up with. You just simply don't want to use any spaces. You can use lowercase letters, capital letters, underscores, or even hyphens if you want to. Now, with the $ in front of the name of the variable simply tells you that it is a variable. Now, what a variable does in PHP programming, it is used to store information. You can store numbers in your PHP variables, or you could even store complete lines of text. Now, if you want to display the value of one of your variables, you can use a simple PHP command called echo. Now, if you use echo and then simply add the name of your variable, you can have the value of it output to the browser on your live website. The one last thing I need to show you here before I move any further is the semicolon that I have used at the end of each of these lines of PHP code. This semicolon closes off each line of coding. You can think of it like a HTML tag that is self-closing, how you had to add the extra / at the end of the HTML tag to close it off. Now, there are instances where you have PHP programming and you don't need to use a semicolon at the end of it. But most general short statements of PHP code like this will almost always have to have a semicolon at the end. If you get it wrong, you'll end up with an error. I'm going to delete this semicolon right off the end of it here and publish this page just so you can see exactly what happens if you forget a semicolon off of there. Oddly enough, this is actually working. That's not supposed to work. Maybe it saved my page before I deleted it. Let me refresh this one more time. Okay, here we go. Parse error, syntax error, unexpected t-echo. Now, when something is unexpected in PHP coding, it usually just means that you have missed something or left something out. In this case, it is the semicolon that closes off your line of coding. When I actually run this coding when it's done correctly and show it to you on my live web page, all you will simply see is the number 1 because I am outputting the value of this variable that I have saved in my code. Now, using this same concept like I was mentioning before, you can not only use numbers in your coding, but you can also use text and save them as variables. Now, to do this, you simply use a quote. I like to use the single quotes, but you could actually use double quotes if you wanted to. Just use a single quote and type in the text that you want to be saved as that variable, and then use another quote that matches your original quote to close it off, and then have your semicolon at the end of it. If I refresh this coding, now the word hello will be output on my page because that is the value that I have saved for the variable A. Now, to get a little bit more complicated, I want to talk about a way that you can essentially change your variables to be able to store more information. Now, this is called an array. What an array is a collection of different information, different variables that are all stored together. Now, I've typed the word array here at the beginning, and then I use an open parentheses, and then I still have my original value here, hello, but I have also added a comma at the end of it, and then I've added in a second value here. And then I close it off with a closing parentheses to match this one at the beginning here. And then I use a semicolon at the end. Now, when I'm using arrays, I can't actually just echo an array because the array has different parts to it. But what I can do is reference the specific parts that are in my array. If I echo A and use a bracket with the number 0 in between and close off that bracket, this 0 references the first value that I have stored in my array. Now, to reference the second value here, all I would have to do is simply reference the next value in that array, which would be the number 1. So now this will output the first value of my array here, and then I have echoed some HTML coding here. I put it in between single quotes, and then I use a period right here to separate my string text right here from my variable. And all this period does is it's connecting them together. So I am echoing this line break, and then I am echoing the second value. So I should get the word hello on one line, and then on the second line, I should get the word hello again. As you can see, that is what is displayed in my browser here. So this is storing multiple parts of information all inside of one variable. Now, to get a little bit more complicated with variables, you noticed here the numbers that I was using to reference the specific values within the variables, the 0 and the 1, these were automatically assigned to the array because I didn't provide it for the array. Now, the 0 and the 1 here, these are known as array keys. A key is simply another variable name inside of the array. So what I can do, instead of depending on those numbers, if I want to have my values actually stored under a key that I know the name of instead of using these incrementing numbers, I basically add another value here into my array before the value that I want to save for this part of the array. And then I separate them with an equal sign and a greater than sign. All this is saying is that this is my key name in the array, and this is the value that I want to save into this key name. Now I can do the same thing again here with my second value in the array, and I can simply store it to a key that actually has a name instead of a number. Now down here, if I want to echo the values that I have saved here, I can no longer use these numbers. I need to actually reference these key names that I have created. And this is done in the same way that I created it. In between the brackets, I use quotes surrounding the name of the key that I've created. As you can see, I put first key right here, and this matches the name that I have set for my key up above it. I do the same thing for the second one, and now this will still give me the same exact result on my public website, but behind the scenes it's much different because I can reference these values using words that make a lot more sense to us than simply the numbers. When you're doing complicated PHP programming, it can really help you out to name your variables and your array keys after words that make sense to you in the context of your programming, because other people are not going to see your programming unless you're distributing it, for example. If you're just building this stuff on your own website, nobody will ever see this. All they're going to see is what happens on the public side of it. So you can name these variables and array keys anything that you want to help you keep better track of everything. Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, I'm going to go ahead and dive into a new aspect of PHP programming and actually start showing you guys some commands. Now, to start with, you remember that I was mentioning the semicolon at the end of a line that is used to close off a PHP command. I want to show you a PHP command that does not use the semicolon at the end of it, so you can understand what the difference is between the two to help you recognize when you need a semicolon at the end and when you do not need a semicolon at the end. I'm going to go ahead and wipe out what I've done here on the page and start over with just a basic example again. I'm going to create a variable by the name of A and store the value of 1 to it. Now, I want to output some text to the browser this time, and I'm going to say that the variable A is equal to 1. I actually just realized here, I'm pretty sure I made this same reference in my guidebook. You see how I use single quotes right here, and then I've used them again inside of my echo command? These single quotes right here in the middle will actually mess up my echo command. So what I want to do is actually add a backslash in front of each of these single quotes right here. And this is an escape character that essentially says to treat this character as if it was part of the string and not one of the opening and closing quotes for the string. So this is one method where you can use these same quotes inside of your text. This is how you would accomplish that. Now, in this particular example, I'm going to use a command called if. Now, if is one of the commands where you actually do not need a semicolon to close it off. I have put my if statement right here. Within the parentheses of my if statement, this is a test that I've created in PHP programming language. And I am looking to see if this test turns out to be true or not. Now, as you can see right here, I have the variable by the name of A. Right after that, I have two equal signs. This is saying that A is equal to the number 1. Now, you might ask, why do they only use two equal signs here instead of just using 1? It's really just a matter of all the different possibilities that can be used here, because equal signs are actually used in combination with less than signs sometimes as well. For example, if you wanted to test whether A was greater than or equal to 1, you could use the greater than symbol and then an equal symbol to test that particular value. For this particular example, though, I'm just going to use a plain old is equal to test. Now, look at my curly brackets here. I have an opening and a closing curly bracket that comes immediately after this if statement. What this does is it is telling my website and my PHP programming that this line of code right here in between the curly brackets, this line should only be run when this if statement right here tests to be true. So if A is actually equal to 1, then this PHP code right here will get run. If A is not equal to run, then nothing is going to end up happening. Nothing will get displayed to the browser. Now, obviously, I've already set my variable A to a value of 1, so this particular test within this coding at least would always turn out to be true, which is what I want for the purpose of this example, just to show you how it works. Now, if I refresh the page, you can see right here that my text was displayed on the screen, and it's even included these single quote marks around the letter A that I had included and added escaping backslashes to. Yeah, that's right, Will. It kind of is a function within a function. The A right here, what you're really doing is disguising these single quote marks. The quote marks at the beginning and the end here are part of the echo function, specifying a beginning and an end. Whereas if you just had these random quote marks in the middle, it would look at this first quote mark here and think that this was the closing quote mark for your echo statement and actually mess things up. But then by adding in the escaping backslashes to it, you are telling it to ignore those characters in the scope of the function, essentially. Now, to build on the if statement just a little bit here, you might be wondering, how could I run code when this if statement is not only true, but how could I run separate code when the if statement turns out to be false? And you can do this by using the else command. Right after the closing curly bracket of your if command, you simply add in the word else. And then you add another set of curly brackets. I have another opening bracket right here after else, and then I have a closing curly bracket down here at the bottom. Anything in between the curly brackets, again, in this situation, will only get run when this if statement turns out to be false. So I could add in some additional text here and say, for example, the variable a. Again, I need to backslash this. I will be sure to get that corrected in the guidebook for you guys, because I'm thinking that I did that incorrectly in the guidebook and did not add those escaping backslashes there. Now in this example, if a was not equal to 1, then this code would get run and display on the browser that the variable is not equal to 1. Now obviously in my coding, a is always going to be 1 because that's what I have defined the value of a as. However, I wanted to actually show you a way that you could do this, accomplish this in your coding before actually complicating things a little bit more and changing around the value of this variable up here. Now, before I actually move on to doing that for you guys, which I will do in just a second, I want to complicate this just a little bit more and show you one more piece to this if-else statement. And that is actually combining these two statements into one and creating an else-if statement. Now, an else-if statement is used when you want to have multiple parts to your statement here, multiple different tests within your statement. In the beginning here, I'm testing if the variable a is equal to 1, and then I run this code if that is true. Dropping down below, I use the else-if statement, and I use a test right in front of it, just like I did here with the if statement. If you look at the end of this right here, this is still an if statement at the end. It just simply has the word else attached to the beginning of it. So this is a second test, and this test will only get looked at if this test proves to be false. So if this test is false, then it moves on to the second test. If this test is true, it would run the code that is in between the curly brackets for this test. And then if both of the tests fail, then it uses this final else code and shows the final text down at the bottom, but only when all of the previous tests within the statement have actually turned out to be false. So in this example, I could expand on the text that I have outputting to the browser here to show something different depending on the circumstances, the value of my variable. So if a is equal to 1, I could say a is equal to 1. If a is equal to 2, I would say a is equal to 2. And if neither of those are true, then I would say that a is not equal to either 1 or 2. Now, once again, this will always turn out to run this first line of code right here because the value of a is always going to be equal to 1 in this particular code. But this shows you how you could go about using a more complicated testing statement. Now, I'm going to actually change the value of this variable for you so you can see what happens when you present a different value of a to this particular test right here. To do that, I'm going to use a PHP command called for. Now, for is a looping PHP command. To start out with, I specify a variable and a number to go with that variable. This is a starting value for the variable in my for loop. Now, the next part of this is I add the ending test for my for loop. So you can see here I've started by saying a is equal to 1. So I want my variable a to start with the value of 1. And then this closing statement right here, I'm saying a is less than or equal to 3. What this means is that I want this for loop to continue to run until this statement right here is no longer true. So this will continue to loop until this statement right here is no longer true. Now, the way that the a variable actually changes its value within this is with the final command right here. I am using a++. Now, I could also write a++ as a plus 1. If I wanted the variable to be jumping more than 1 at a time each time this loop is cycled through, I could do a plus 5, for example. But I'm using a shorthand code for a plus 1, which is simply a++. This just means add 1 to the value each time that it loops through. You can also notice up here that I use semicolons to separate each of these commands, but I did not have to use one at the very end here for this last command because this is part of my for statement. Typically, whenever you are using parentheses and curly brackets, you will not need to use semicolons to close off your statement, like back here at the end, for example. That's unnecessary typically when you're using parentheses and curly brackets because those are specifying the beginning and the end of different portions of your coding. Now, with the for command, I need to actually tell my coding what part of my script I want to be looped over and over again when this for command is being run. And I do that by using more curly brackets. You can see I added one immediately after the for command here, and then I have added another one all the way down here at the bottom of this page. And all that means is that all the code in between it is going to be run each time that this for command loops through. So to start with, a will have a value of 1, and then all this code will get run. And then it goes back to the top. A is increased by a value of 1, so a would be equal to 2 on the second time around. And then this code gets run a second time. And then it jumps back up to the top yet again, and a is increased to a value of 3. So it continues to run yet a third time. But then when a is increased to a value of 4, it fails to pass this particular test right here, so the loop will actually stop. So this particular code is actually going to be run 3 different times in this script by using this for loop up at the top. Now I'm going to add in some line break HTML coding right here just so all this text doesn't get jumbled up next to each other. I'm going to save the changes and show you how this works on my live website now that I actually have something to change the value of a for me. As you can see, all 3 of the different statements that I had in my PHP coding, they all ended up getting displayed to the browser because the various tests that were set for this variable, each of them turned out to get run by having a value of a being both 1, 2, and 3 and processing the same code over and over again. Now, to get a little bit more complicated yet again, I'm going to dive into something called functions within your PHP programming. Let's see, Will says all my code between his PHP tags are showing as text. There's a pretty decent chance that you're not using the PHP exec plugin, Will. If you have the PHP exec plugin installed and activated, there's also a chance that you might be in this visual tab right here. You need to make sure that your PHP coding goes into this text tab instead. Oh, not a problem, Will. Yeah, I guess I did cover that in the beginning. And I don't think you were here in the very beginning of it. Now moving on to PHP functions. I'm actually going to wipe out this code that I've done here and backtrack for just a second. And I'm going to recreate the array that I was using previously. Now, the reason I want to recreate this array real quick is to show you a PHP command that can be used with arrays instead of single strings. Not a problem, Will. It's all good. Let me finish typing all this in here. Okay, so I have my array that is stored to the variable a. Now, if you remember a little earlier, when I wanted to display each of these individual values in my array, the hello value and the hello again value, I had to reference the keys in the array by typing something like this, a and first key. This would reference the first value in this array. But what if you wanted to know what all of the values in your array were? There's really not a great practical purpose for using this particular PHP function, which is called print r with an underscore in between print and r. You simply use opening and closing parentheses and then put your variable array in between the parentheses. And what this is going to do is it's going to output the entire variable to your page. But this will not just be the values, it will also be your keys for the values as well. So with that said, once again, there's not a real great practical purpose for using this on live websites. However, if you use arrays and say perhaps something isn't working correctly in your coding and you need to see what is contained within your array, you can use this print r command to display everything within your array on your browser. So I actually use this myself when I'm building my own scripts for debugging purposes. Because as you can see here, I get the entire array displayed on my page. It tells me that the variable is an array, and then it gives me the keys as well as the values for it. Now, there are literally tons of PHP functions that are out there that you guys could possibly be using. My intentions in this training for tonight is not to go through a long list of these PHP functions for you guys, but it's really to teach you the concepts behind using them, so then you could go out and research a PHP function that you might want to use for a particular purpose on your site and actually be able to figure out how to use it. Now, I gave a website address, php.net, in the guidebook. This is the official website for the PHP programming language. I use this website all the time. You honestly do not have to remember all of these PHP commands, all of the different syntax or the arguments that might go along with the commands or functions. You really just need to remember the basics of all of this, and then you can use php.net as a reference guide to help you to learn new commands and functions. This is actually how I learned programming in the very, very beginning. Over 10 years ago, I started learning. And even to this day, despite all of the experience, despite the fact that I actually do commercial programming and sell the products that I release, I'm still a learner, just like people that are brand new out there. Every day I'm trying to learn something new. I'm still using PHP.NET to learn new functions in the programming language so I can enhance my scripts even more and get them to do more things. So don't ever think that you have to know all of this. I know at a first glance all of this stuff can be a little bit confusing and even overwhelming. So I just wanted to really encourage you guys to not let that get to you. Now, I'm going to revisit a example that I was doing before, going back to all of my my if, else, and else if statement that I was doing previously. To teach you about PHP functions, but this time instead of teaching you about the built-in PHP functions, what I actually want to do is to teach you how you can create your own PHP functions. And the reason why you want to do so is for one purpose is at least code bloat. If you remember me mentioning back when we were doing CSS last week, how I talked about repeating the same coding over and over again essentially just makes your file sizes larger, and it causes you to have slower websites as a result. So in PHP programming, you really still have the same type of thing going on, except that to duplicate your coding over and over again, you need to create your own customized functions. So what I am doing here is I'm going back to this if-else statement, and I'm going to take this coding and show you how you could turn it into your own customized function that could then be reused over and over again on your website or within the script that you are building for your website. Now, initially, you might find that using functions can be helpful in other ways, just as an organizational tool. All of this PHP programming can quickly run together, and you may not be able to distinguish what's going on in one part from the next. And if you ever decide that you need to return to your programming and make some changes to it, it can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if you haven't looked at your coding in a while. You kind of lose your familiarity with your own programming over time. So one of the ways that you can combat that is by creating functions and using PHP comments along with your functions to describe what everything in your coding is actually doing. I have my previous example typed back in up here. This is the if-else and else-if statement that I was doing before that is also using the for statement to loop through this coding a number of different times. Now what I want to show you is, let's say, for example, this particular series of tests that I've created right here. What if I wanted to use these tests more than one time throughout my script? I could obviously copy and paste it over and over again in my script, but then if I ever wanted to make changes to it, even if it was just a simple text change, for example, if I wanted to change some of the output that was within these tests, I would have to update it all of the different times that I duplicated it on my entire page or throughout my entire script. And that is simply a time-consuming process that you really don't have to deal with. Now, what I've done here is I've removed all of the information from this script, and I'm going to put it into its own function. Now, I create a function by using the PHP command function. After that, I simply create my own name for the function. This can be anything you want to, using the same rules that you would use when you're creating a variable name. So no spaces, but you can use lowercase letters, uppercase letters, even numbers if you want to. Just don't start your function names with a number. Always start them with a letter. And you can also use underscores within your function names. Now, after you have typed your function name, you need to have an opening and a closing parentheses. Anything that is in between these two parentheses is an argument for your function. Now, what an argument is, it's simply a variable, a piece of information that you want to pass along from the normal part of your script into your function. Because going back down here to the bottom to my for statement, each time I'm looping through this, the value of A is changing. And the output of these tests right here is dependent upon the value of that variable. So I need for this variable to make it into my function, and I do that by passing it as an argument. So this brings the variable A into my function right here. Now, really all this is doing is declaring that there is going to be an argument in my function, and it's going to save it within the function to the variable name of A. I could actually change this variable within my function to be a completely different name. I could change all of these A's throughout all of this code right here into B's instead of A's. What actually matters is where I'm passing that information through, and that is done within my code where that value actually exists. Now, to call a function, as you can see, all I did was copy the end of it right here to get the function name along with the argument that I want passed into it. If you keep all of your variable names the same that you're passing into your functions, it can make it a little bit easier on you, because all you have to do is simply copy and paste if you can't remember the name of your function or the different arguments that go in it. So now I have, up here at the top, I have a function that I've created, and every time the function is run, it will receive this value as the variable A, and it will run this code using this value. So within my for statement down here, since this is looped through numerous different times, all I have to do is call the function and pass the value into it, and this actually gives me the same exact result that I had previously before I was using the custom function. As you can see, each of the different parts of that test still gets output to my page. The main difference here is that I could continue to use this function throughout my coding as many more times as I needed by simply referencing the function name and passing this value to it that it needs to process all the coding that is within the function. So this is one way that you can simplify your coding to avoid rewriting things over and over again, to simply do it one time and then to move on from there and forget about it, and you can simply reuse it literally with ease at any point after that, as long as it's within your same website script here. Now, the next thing that I'm going to move on to is I need to talk to you guys about databases a little bit. If you remember from the very first week of this training, when I was doing the cPanel training, we actually went into a database and created a new database table. Now, I'm going to be doing that in just a few more minutes and actually revisiting that stuff for a moment. But before I do that, I want to show you actually a more simplified way that you can save information in your PHP scripts within your WordPress sites specifically. So you can save this information to a database, but you can avoid going through the extra work involved with creating your own table and writing all of this custom coding to actually save the information to your table. And the way that this is done is by using what is called a WordPress option. Now, WordPress options are actually just a database table that is created in the WordPress system by default. Every single WordPress site in existence has these WordPress options and the option database table. So WordPress provides you functions that you can use to quickly store information to this particular option table and also to be able to easily retrieve that information. Now, to start out with, I'm going to create a variable. I will just call this my value. And I'm going to save to this variable just some random text, and I'll just say like that this is the information that I want to save to my database. Now, that's a good question, Will. Will is asking if you can add the PHP commands, the tags, more than one time per page, or if it's only allowed once. You can actually use those repeatedly throughout your page, as many different times as you want to. Actually, a little bit later tonight, towards the end when I'm doing the final complete example for you guys, I've actually done that pretty heavily. I've used the PHP tag numerous times throughout the page. So I guess I will wait till I get to that point, and I will definitely be going over that with you guys. Now, to save this particular variable to my database, let me explain what I mean by saving here. When you have variables within your PHP coding, those variables and the information contained within them only exist while your PHP script is actually running and somebody is on your web page. Now, if somebody leaves your web page and they return to it, that information is going to be gone. You can't store permanently information in PHP variables and have it exist from one person to the next or from one session on your website to the next. So to actually permanently store information outside of the scope of your PHP variables, that is when you want to move information into the database. Now, as I was saying before, I'm going to use some simple WordPress functions to accomplish this for me. To start out with, I'm going to use the command called add option. This is a WordPress function, so I'm going to use a opening parentheses to start my function right here to add arguments to my function. And the arguments that I'm going to add to it there's only two of them that this requires. The first one is the name that I am assigning to this option. You can think of this name as a key for an array. This is the way you identify the information in the database. You're saving it with this key name, and then when you want to retrieve that same information from the database, you simply use this same name again to retrieve the information that you have stored. Now, the second argument here is simply the information that you want to save. I have added this text in here as my value, and so I'm going to simply pass that along to this function. And so now this text right here will get saved as a WordPress option with this being the name. I'm going to go ahead and save this and refresh my page. Now, you're not actually going to see anything on this page. As you can see, this page is completely blank, and that's because I'm not actually displaying any information to my page here. This is all simply programming that is taking place on the back end and is not affecting what my website visitors are seeing. So let's say that I had a visitor come to my website and I saved some type of information specifically for that one visitor, and maybe I wanted to retrieve that information later on for them, perhaps as like a user profile, for example, where somebody has entered in their name and email address and other information about themselves. To do that, all you do is simply use the WordPress function of get option instead of add option. Now, get option only requires one argument instead of two. All you need for get option is the key name that you assigned to your option. Now, when I'm actually getting the value of this option right here, this line of code alone will not display the value of the option on my public website. What this is doing is it's actually trying to return the value so I can save it as a variable. So for example, I could save the return from the getOption function as the variable A, and then I could echo the value of A on my public site if I wanted to display that information. Now, alternatively, instead of saving this to a variable, you can go ahead and directly echo returned information like this. I could simply echo the output of getOption like this, or I could save it to a variable, use it in some way, form, or fashion, or simply turn around and display it on my page. Now, I'm going to save the changes here. This time around, as you can see, I no longer actually have the information on this page and in this script that defined the value for this particular option. So this coding right here can only work if I previously saved the value of this particular option. And for the purpose of this tutorial, I want to show you this code running so you can actually see that the original text that I entered in for the value of my option is now being displayed on my page, even though it doesn't even exist in my page at all anymore, because that information is now stored in my database as a WordPress option using this particular name. So I can pull that information up anytime I want to with this simple line of code. Now, if I wanted to revisit an option that I saved and update the value that I have saved for it, I can do that by simply using a new command called update option. Now, update option works just like the add option function does. you need the name of your option that was previously saved, because you're not creating it here, you're updating the value of it here. And then your second argument is simply the new value that you would like to save. So this time around, I will be updating the option to a new value and just saying that this is my new information, will be the new text that I am trying to save here. Why did that not save correctly? I might be timed out on my page. Let me get my coding back here real quick, and then I will show this to you guys. It didn't completely save everything. Okay. So I have my value up here, and then I'm going to be updating this option in my database with this new value right here this time around. Now I save the changes and I refresh my page, and once again I'm not going to see any output this time because I haven't told my page to actually display anything. So to show you that this has actually worked, then I could change my coding once again and use the get option function and retrieve the new value that I have saved for this option and display it on my web page. So this time you'll see that it is saved as this is my new information instead of the previous text that I had entered the first time around. Now, if you ever decide that you're completely done with an option, it's a good idea to get rid of it from the WordPress system, because you don't want all of these saved options with information in your database if they don't actually serve a purpose in being there. So if you only use this to temporarily store information, for example, you could simply clear out an option that you have previously saved by using the delete option command. This works just like the get option command, where all you need to provide is the option name as the one argument for it, and there's nothing else that you have to do. There's no return value for this that you're trying to save or anything like that. All you're doing here is deleting the option. This permanently deletes it from the options database table. You could go back later and create an option by the same exact name again at a later point in time, but once you run this particular command, then any information that was already saved by that option name is gone forever. So only use this particular command if you're positive that you're completely done with whatever information you have saved using that option name. Now, to move beyond WordPress options, I have to get into talking about using the actual database tables. But before you can use WordPress to interact with your database, there is one more concept that you need to understand, and that is using globals. Now, a global is a global variable. It is really a variable that is not limited within the particular script or function that you are writing, for example. It could be a variable declared somewhere else in the same coding that is being processed on your page, but that information could be made available outside of the local scope. Now, if you remember me creating the function before where I had to pass the value of A into that function to get it to process all of the code that I needed. Think of a global variable in those terms. Instead of needing to pass that variable along to ensure that it is available, all I have to do is use the global command to bring that variable into the scope of this particular page. Now, the reason why you need to know how to do this to be able to use database programming with a WordPress site is because WordPress has done a ton of the work for you when it comes to working with your databases. They have all of these pre-built functions that you can use to add new information to databases or remove information or to simply retrieve information from databases in various ways. You could still manipulate databases outside of WordPress, but inside of WordPress you have access to these special functions that will honestly save you a ton of work and a ton of time. Now, the one in particular that I want to mention to you is the WPDB global variable. This stands for WordPress database. This variable is not just a plain and simple variable. I could not use a line of code like echo WPDB. This would actually not work correctly because this variable here is actually what's known as a PHP class. Now, a class is a combination, basically a grouping of functions and even variables, but it's only available through the class variable, which is this variable right here. So I will teach you guys in just a few minutes how to actually use this and how to use the class functions available within this global variable here in just a couple of moments. But before I proceed on to that, I want to just mention a couple of other global variables that are available within WordPress itself. If you're trying to build, for example, some type of membership site with WordPress, and maybe you want the public website visitors to see one thing on your site, but then you want the registered and logged in members to see something completely different. You can actually accomplish this by using WordPress global variables that are out there to determine whether the person visiting your site is a logged in member or not. Now, one of the ways that you can do this is by using this particular global variable right here, user ID, with a hyphen in between, and make sure you capitalize the letters ID at the end, or else this won't work. I'm going to bring this global variable into my page here, and then I'm going to simply output the value of this variable. Now, as you can see, there's a number 1 on my web page here. What this means is this is actually the ID number of the user account that I am logged into on this web page. I am the administrator on this web page, the first user on the account. If I open up my users here, you can see that I'm the only person here on this site. So by default, the administrator has a user ID of the number 1. And then other registered users on your site might have higher user ID numbers. Each new member that you get, their user ID number would be 1 higher than the previous one. So knowing that the user ID number is going to exist, and only when somebody is logged in on your website as a registered member, you could use this to determine whether somebody is a logged in user or not. I could simply say if user ID is greater than or equal to the number 1, then I want to run this code. And if they're not a member, then I want to run this code. So I could say right here that this person is a registered member, and this person right here is not a registered member. So now when I run this code on my public website here, obviously I am logged in and registered on this site. So the message that gets displayed should be pretty obvious. It's going to tell me that I am a registered member. However, if I were to completely log out of this website and visit this same page, it would tell me the other message, that I am not a registered member of the site. So you can use this simple global variable within your WordPress posts and pages to retrieve some information about the people that are on your websites in terms of whether they're registered on your site or not. Now, I know some of you guys will have Amazon affiliate sites, for example, where you don't use member accounts on your site, so nobody is a registered member there. And that's okay. This particular technique might not be something that you ever use on that type of website. But if you want to make your websites different, if you want to perhaps hide some information from your public visitors and encourage people to create an account on your website so they can see the hidden content, for example, this is a really, really simple way that you can accomplish this. Now, beyond the user ID variable, there are a couple of other ones that WordPress offers you. Just to show you real quick, I'm going to type these in on my screen here. And as you can see, I use a comma here, and I'm actually declaring more than one global variable all at the same time, all within this one particular line of code. Now, I've added each of these different global variables into the guidebook for you guys and provided a brief description of what type of information is contained within these different variables. But this is one example of how you could call all of these global variables into the local scope of your script and use them. So you could actually know what your website visitor's name is if they're a logged-in member, for example. So instead of having a generic website, you could say on your website, "Hello, Ryan. Welcome. How are you?" You know, make it a little more personal for them because you can actually pull up their saved member information directly in your pages like this. Now, there are a lot of other global variables in WordPress. There are even a lot of other global variable classes in WordPress, such as the WP-DB class. I've provided a link to a WordPress page where you can see a more complete listing of these, just in case there happens to be some type of information that you're looking for in WordPress that you want to make available within your pages. For example, on any given page that you are on, there is a class variable that holds all of the information for that page, like the title of the page and the content of the page, and so on. So you could actually access that information directly through PHP coding and perhaps manipulate it in a particular way. Now, I'm going to proceed here with using the WP-DB class and actually showing you guys how you can use this to do some more complicated database transactions and really do a lot more with your website than you could do from using simple WordPress options, for example. Now, I've gone into the cPanel of my website here because I need to create a database table that I can actually use in my programming, because I don't want to be adding information to the existing WordPress database tables. I want to create my own table, so this table can just contain the information for what I'm doing, and so I can make this information specialized for the purpose that I want to do. I'm going to be going into PHP My Admin within the cPanel here to create the database table. Now, just to start out with, as you can see, this is one of my shared hosting accounts that I have that I use to run a lot of my Amazon affiliate sites from. I have a couple of these set up which have, as you can see, it looks like this one probably has 40 websites or so on it. So I try not to put too horribly many websites all onto one hosting account. If it's a shared account, I use dedicated servers for all of my plugin websites, for example. But for my affiliate sites, I just use shared hosting, so I often have a ton of different databases all on the same hosting account. If you're not quite sure which one that you should be using, what you can do is over on the left-hand side, let me go back to this page here so you can see this again. Just click on one of the databases that are available. And when you're in that database, look for the WordPress options database. This is where the WordPress options are saved to for your website. Now, you can see when I first open this, right up at the top, the very first option is site URL, and it tells me the domain name for the website that is using this particular database. So if you're ever not sure of which database on your shared hosting account applies to your particular website, that is the easiest way that you can figure that out. Just check out the WordPress options table and look for your domain name in there. Now, what I'm going to be doing for the purpose of this tutorial is creating my own database table here. Once you've clicked on the database that you want to be in for your website, over on the left, it will list all of the tables on your site on this database here, and then down at the bottom there's a section right here where you can create a new table. Now, for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to call this table WP_MyForm. Now, the reason why I have added this WP_ to the beginning of my table name is to continue to use the same naming format that WordPress uses for all of their tables. As you can see, the beginning of all of these tables starts with WP_. Now, I'll show you actually why I'm doing this here once I get into some of the PHP coding for these databases. But for now, all I'm doing is creating the actual table that I'm going to use. Now, after you provide the name, you simply provide a number of columns that you're going to be using. This table is going to have 5 columns in it. Now, if you may have noticed up here, I actually have this table already created on this site. My reason for doing so is because of the enormous amount of information that I have to cover for you guys tonight. I'm going to try to speed up at least a couple parts of this process just so we don't get bogged down doing some of these boring technicalities. But I have taken screenshots of this entire process and put it in the guidebook for you guys so you can see exactly how to create these tables. I'm going to go ahead and change the name of this table down here and just add a 2 onto the end of it, just so I can bring up this next window for you and quickly show you what I'm doing here. In the guidebook, I've taken a screenshot of the top of this table right here. Going down the left-hand side here, I need to enter in the names of the columns that I want to use on this database. I'm actually going to be using the five columns that I mentioned that I wanted to have created for this database table. So going down the left-hand side here, I simply provide a customized name for each of them. Now, you may notice that the actual word that I'm using here is at the end of each of these names: name, email, comment. But this MYF that I've put at the beginning, this is what's known as using a prefix. Now, I highly recommend using a prefix for not only your WordPress or for your database column names, but also within your programming, your variables, your array names, even things like your WordPress tables, as I mentioned before, and your custom created functions that you write in your scripts. When you use a prefix that is something that you've just created, and it's some random series of letters that maybe make some type of sense to you. MyF stands for my form, the name of this table that I've created. This is just a way to ensure that your names do not cause some type of conflict. Because, for example, within a database, there are certain names that you could enter into these columns right here, and they wouldn't work correctly. And you might be baffled for hours as to why exactly it wasn't working correctly, and it could be just because you used a column name that's not allowed, because it's used for some other purpose. Perhaps it is a database command, for example. You can't use the commands as column names because it causes some type of conflict. Well, within your programming, especially on a WordPress site, for example, if you're creating your own custom functions and giving them very generalized name, let's say you tried to create your own function called add option, but that function already exists in the WordPress system, you would actually end up with errors as a result. So using the prefix is a way to make sure that all of your stuff has a unique name that will not cause conflicts with other scripts that are running on your site. Now, back to the database here. Going down the middle column, the type here, this is just simply telling the database what type of information you will have saved for each of these columns. This column is going to be an integer, and it's going to have a maximum value of 11 numbers in length. This particular one is going to be a string. This is what the variable character is here. It's actually a string that can have different lengths to it. So this string could be a maximum of 64 characters long, but this string could be a maximum of 255 characters long. You're setting numbers here. You want them to be high enough to be able to contain any of the information that you are possibly going to save, but you don't want these numbers to be higher than you actually need them to be, because it's just creating extra, essentially, blank space in your storage information. Now, with the text type down here, you don't have to provide a length. This just simply says that it's going to be a bunch of text. If you found that your saved text was getting cut off, you could use something like long text, for example. Long text will accept more text than just the standard text type. But we're talking about quite a bit of text here. Even the standard text type can accept literally paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs full of content. So I typically use this unless I know that I'm going to be saving quite a bit of information. Now the second screenshot that I provided over here, it scrolled all the way to the far right of this window that I'm in. I'm going over to the index and the AI columns here. The very first row here I want to set as primary, and I want to check it as an auto-incrementing column. When I'm done with all that, I got to scroll to the bottom and click on the Save button here. Now, I'm not actually going to save this because I already have this form created on my site here. I'll go ahead and remove the information that I have from it, so when I get around to doing the actual test for it, you can see it work correctly. As you can see here, I have these different columns with the types and the links all entered in, as I was talking about before, and I've set the MyFID column as the primary, and it's an auto-incrementing column, which means that every time I put new information into this database, this value is going to automatically increment itself by a value of 1 each time. So it will keep counting a new number for me every new row of information I add to my database. And this is really just something that I use as a identifier for the information. I'll get to this again just a little bit later when I get into my my complete example on this particular subject at the end of the course tonight. The next thing I'm going to be going into doing, now that I have my database table created for me, is I can start to use that database table within my programming. Now, the first thing that I'm going to start with is to show you how you can put information into your database table. To do this, you need to create a MySQL query, which is essentially a series of commands and information that tells your script what information to put into your database and also where to put it. Now, to create one of these queries that will use our database, we're going to simply create a variable to start with, and the variable is going to be a string. This entire text string here is the actual MySQL query that will be processed into our database. So to start with, when I want to add information to my database table, I'm using the command insert into. This is not a PHP command, but this is a MySQL command, which is the MySQL, in case you're not familiar with it, is actually what your databases, most of them at least, what they are based on. It's essentially a database language. So going back to this here, after I use my insert into command, I'm going to add in a space here, and then I'm going to close off this string with a single quote right here, matching this one right here. And then I'm going to use a period again. As you remember, may remember from a little earlier, the period, when used with a string, combines the pieces together. So I'm combining this text in with this variable. Now, the variable that I'm using here is actually part of this WPDB class. But instead of it being a function, this particular one is nothing more than a variable that is saved. WPDB, this is a hyphen right here, and then a greater than symbol, and then I simply use the word prefix. This gives me the database table prefix that is used on this site. And by default, that prefix is WP_, which is what I used when I created my table name. So now, instead of typing in WP underscore every time, all I have to do is type in the name that I gave my table, my form right here. The WP underscore will automatically be added into my coding for me because that is what is saved as this variable right here. So this is telling that I want to add information to my database table, and this is specifying the table where I want to add that information. The next part of this is to then tell what information you want to add into the database. You do this using the set command. After your set command, you simply provide a series of column names. The column name is right here. These different unique names that I came up with for the information that I want to save in my table. These are my column names. So I simply provide a column name. So I will say my F time, and then I want to say what the value of this column should be saved as. However, when you're doing website programming and using databases, there is something extremely important to remember here. Whenever you're dealing with information that doesn't come directly from your website scripts, I'm talking about information that comes from your website visitors, what is known as user input. Whenever you're dealing with user input, you simply can't trust what your website visitors are providing you for information, because this is actually one of the easiest ways for people to hack into websites, is by using malicious code in user input. For example, if you have a contact form where somebody can come and send you a message, they could enter in PHP and MySQL coding into your message box in just the right way to where it actually breaks your coding and then gives them complete control to execute any code that they want to on your websites. Now, initially, this might sound a little scary, but the truth of the matter is that there is an easy way that you can protect your websites and your coding from bad user input. And WordPress has done all the hard work for you here and actually built all of these features in to this WP-DB class for you. So right here, instead of telling the exact value that I want to insert here, I am going to use what is known as a placeholder. This placeholder right here is a percentage sign followed by a letter. I'm using the letter D for this particular placeholder because my F time is a number. As you can see back on my database table here, my F time is going to be a whole number that is up to 11 numbers long. So this placeholder of percentage sign and the letter D is the placeholder for whole numbers. Anytime you're going to use a whole number, you use this as the placeholder for that whole number. Now, I add a comma, and then I proceed on to typing in the additional column names that are part of this database table. Now, this particular column, my F name, this is going to be a real name that I'm saving into my database. So this is actually text and not numbers. When you're dealing with text, you use the placeholder of percentage sign S. S stands for string. So that can take, you can still actually enter in numbers as S because numbers can be parts of a string, for example. Now, if you wanted to use decimals, you cannot use D for your decimals. You actually need to use percentage sign F for your decimals, which is known as a float, which is a floating number, as in the decimal point. So I'm not going to be using F as a placeholder in this particular example, but I at least wanted to go ahead and mention it to you, so you know that there is a third placeholder that you can use. Every bit of information will be one of those three placeholders. It's either a whole number or a decimal number, and if it's not one of those two, then it's a string, so you use S. Once I have typed in all the different fields that I want to have saved in my database, I close this off with another single quote and use a semicolon, and this stores this entire string as this variable right here. Now the next step is I need to create an array of data. I'm going to call this array data array, just so it makes sense. And the array that the information that I'm saving into this array is going to be a series of variables that will be used to replace each of the placeholders that I have put in my coding up here. So all I do is look at my coding up here, look for my first placeholder, which is going to be for my F time, and then I simply put the variable that will be replacing this placeholder in the first spot in my array. Now, the myFtime column, I'm actually going to be saving this into this column what is known as a timestamp. A timestamp is a count of seconds from essentially when the Linux programming language was created. Sorry, the Unix programming language, which was back in the 70s. Now, none of that really matters. All that really matters to you guys is that this is a long number. 11 numbers in length is long enough to hold a timestamp. And you can actually take these numbers and convert them into real dates and specific times that then make sense to us. So I'll be getting to that part a little bit later on in the final example for this evening. But for now, I'm just simply going to mention that I'm using a PHP function called time, and you use an opening and closing parentheses because I'm not specifying any arguments. This is just going to give me the timestamp of the current second when this part of my script gets run. The next part here, I'm adding in another value here to represent the next portion of this coding to replace the next placeholder. The next placeholder is for name, so I'm going to add in my name here as a value to save into this database. Now the next part is an email address, so I'm simply going to add in an email address here as the next value, and then the final value is just a comment. So it could be any amount of text. So I could just say that this is the content of my comment that I want to save. Now, I close off this array here. As you can see, there are 4 values in this array. 1, 2, 3, and 4, with each of them being separated by a comma. And up here in my SQL query, there are 4 placeholders, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So each placeholder corresponds to a value within this array. Now that I have this query written up here, and I also have the array built that contains all the information that I want saved in my database. All I have to do now is to actually use the WPDB class to execute all of this information, process it into my database. Now, to start with, I'm going to be using a function in this class called query. This function, I start with an opening parentheses. But since I have used placeholders in my string up here, I have to use a second class function along with it. And this is the prepare function for the WPDB class. Now you can see when I'm using the class, just like I did up here, all I do is type the name of the variable for the class. And then I use a hyphen, and then I use a greater than symbol, and then I use the name of the function or the variable that is in that class. The query function will execute a MySQL query into the database. The prepare function is used to replace all the placeholders in my coding up here with the actual values for those placeholders. Now you might wonder, why didn't I just put this information directly into this string up here? The reason for that is obviously this information that I'm saving came directly from me because I typed it all in here. However, in a real world situation, this information would probably be information that is typed in by your website visitors. So as I mentioned before, you can't trust the information that they're punching into your websites. You have to what is known as validate this information before you can enter it into your own database. Now, WordPress simplifies all of this for you and does all of the validation that you need within this prepare function right here. So all you have to do are provide the two pieces of information that it needs to work. It needs your MySQL query, which you reference that. I have the array here that has my query. I'm using that as my first argument. And then my second argument is going to be my data array. Now I've closed off my parentheses here to match the prepare function. But as you can see, I still have this opening parentheses for my query function as well. So I need a second parentheses at the end to close it off. And then once again, I use a semicolon. So if I save this coding, this is not going to show any type of information on my public web page. However, you can see when I refresh it, it's completely blank. But then if I return to my database here, you can see that there is now information saved into the database. And this is the information that I typed in right here into this data array. My name, my address, my email address here, the comment that I wanted to save, and even the current timestamp. All this information is saved in right here. Now, you might wonder, if you were counting here, why I had 4 column names and 4 placeholders in my coding, but in my actual table, I have 5. This one column right here, the MyFID column, I did not actually make any reference to this column in my coding back over here. The reason why is because this is that auto-incrementing column that I created when I was setting up all the information for this particular database table. And this number gets automatically incremented by 1 for each new row of information that is put into this database. Now, I've already done some rows of information in this database and deleted them previously, So this first row was actually given an ID number of 6. But in most cases, if you have just created the database and you enter in the first row of information to it, that ID number will begin at the number 1, and then it will start counting up from there. So I've already had 5 entries in this database, which I've deleted. But even though those entries don't exist anymore, it still remembers the auto-incrementing value and gives this one a new ID number. So this is something that you can use in your own scripts to help and identify information in your database. For example, in WordPress, you have a user ID number. Even if a user is deleted from the site and a new user comes along and is created, it will not reuse the same old ID number from a previous user. Each new user will get a completely brand new and unique ID number, and this is how that gets accomplished. It's all done in the back end by the database and this auto-incrementing number. So now that I have this information saved into this page, I'm going to back up just a little bit and remove some of this coding. And then I'm going to show you how to retrieve the information from the database that you have already saved. Now, to do this, to retrieve information from your databases, you need to know what information you are looking to retrieve. For example, if you had a database table that was saving information for your website registered members and using their ID number to associate the information in your database table with a specific user on your website, then you would want to be pulling up information based on that ID number, for example. So this is the first example that I'm going to use to show you how to get information from a database, and that is when you already know some of the information in the database that you want to use to find all of the information that you want to pull out. So for this example, going back here, you notice that the myFID value is set to 6. So let's say I want to retrieve all of the information for that particular row out of my database. All I would do is first I create my MySQL query. I want to use the command select. And this star right here is saying that I want to select everything from the database table. Now, by everything, I'm referring to each of these different columns of information right here. If I only wanted to retrieve, for example, the name column out of this database table, if I didn't need this other information in this coding, for example, I could type in myFname right here and just retrieve the name column from this database table. But for the purpose of this example, I'm going to go ahead and pull everything, all 5 of those columns out of the database table, just so you can see exactly how this works. Now, I use another command here called from, select star from. So this is basically just saying I want to select all of the columns from this database table, and then you specify the database table. Once again, using the prefix for your database table name. Then you use the PHP command where. This is telling the database that you want to search for something, and you're going to be providing a column name along with some type of test to use for that search. Now, I want to pull the column where this ID number is equal to 6, so that's my test. My FID is equal to 6. Now, you don't have to use two equal signs here like you did in the PHP programming, because remember, this is not actually PHP programming. This is MySQL programming. So the syntax is a little bit different. You don't use double equal symbols. You just have to use one. Now, to retrieve all of this information, all I have to do is use another one of these functions in the WPDB class. And this function that I want to use is called getRow with an underscore in between those two words. Now, getRow has two different arguments here that you need to provide. The first one is the query that you want to run. Now, you might notice here that I'm not using the prepare function this time along with it. I could still use the prepare function here. Prepare function would essentially replace this query variable right here. And then obviously this variable then goes inside of the prepare function. But the reason why I'm not using it here is because I'm not using any placeholders. There is no user input here that I have to be concerned with. All the information comes directly from me that I am entering into the database right here. So for this purpose, I'm not going to use the prepare function this time around, just so you can see how a query would work without using that. Now, the second argument for the getRow function here, all in capital letters, I have written out array underscore A. This is telling this particular WordPress function that I want all of my database results returned as a named array. Now, a named array is the example that I provided you a little earlier, where I create an array as a variable, and then I provide key names for each of the different values in that variable. That is a named array. So this command right here is going to pull this database information, and it's going to return it as an array. So since I'm having information returned here, I need to save that information into a variable, or obviously directly show it on the page. Now, just so you can see the information that is being pulled out for this array, for this particular search, I'm going to use the printr command here and simply output all of the contents of the array row that will be my database results for this particular search. So now when I save the changes on my page and go over here and refresh, you can see that on my page an array is outputted here, and within the array are the different columns of information that I have saved into my database table. There's the ID, there's the timestamp that I created, and then there's my name and email and the message that I entered in. So with just this one simple query right here, I've been able to retrieve all of this saved information from just this one particular row in my database. Now, let's say I have more than one row worth of information in my database, and I want to retrieve that, for example. I'm going to back up here, and I copied all this coding from before. This was the coding that I used just a second ago to enter all of this information into my database the first time around. I'm actually going to run this same exact code again. Now, the reason why I'm doing so is so I can have 2 rows worth of information in my database. These rows are exactly the same with 2 minor exceptions. The ID number has counted up 1 for this new row, and then the timestamp is a little bit different. As you can see, this one is about 700 higher than the previous one. That means that about 700 seconds has passed in between the creation of these 2 particular rows of information in my database. So now returning back to this page and back to my previous example, this example would only pull that 1 row worth of information out of my database. But what if I wanted to pull both rows out of my database at the same time? And even more importantly, for example, what if I didn't know these ID numbers to pull this information out of my database? Let's say I didn't know any of the information here. If this was just a contact form on my website where people could enter in a message to me, I might simply want to retrieve a list of all the messages that people have entered into my website so I can look at those. I wouldn't know the people's names or the ID numbers or even necessarily how many messages had been created. So to retrieve information from your database when you don't actually know parts of the information to use for searching, you can actually just get rid of your searching portion of your code. This code right here, select star from my form, this is going to automatically select every single row of information out of this database without knowing anything about it. So it's going to pull everything that you see here, both of these rows and all of the columns of content right here. So to go just a little bit more complicated with this example though, what if you wanted to change the order that all of the information was retrieved out of your database? If these were messages created by your website visitors, for example, maybe you would want to look at a list of all these messages, but perhaps you would want the most recent messages to appear at the top of your list and the older ones to appear at the bottom of your list. How would you ensure that that information is retrieved from your database and properly sorted in the way that you want it to be? This is all done through your MySQL query right here. I'm going to add in the command order by, separated by a space, and then all I do is simply add in the column name that I want to use for sorting. So for example, I know that the myFID column will be a number that increments up for each new row of information added to my database. So I could sort by this particular column, knowing that the lower numbers will be my older entries and the higher numbers would be my newer entries. So to ensure that this gets sorted in the proper direction, you then use another command after the column name to tell it the direction to sort. I have used the command DESC, which stands for descending, which basically just says I want my results sorted from the highest number descending down to the lowest number. Now the opposite of this would be ascending. You just use ASC instead of DESC if you wanted to sort in the opposite direction. Now sorting is not just a numerical thing. You can sort using text as well. If I were to sort using the myFname column and use an ascending sort on it, for example, then it would show me all of the records in alphabetical order by the myFname column, starting with the A's and working down to the Z's. So you can use this sorting to not only sort things numerically for you, but also alphabetically for you as well. Now, the only thing that is going to be different a little bit further down here is the function name that I'm going to use. Instead of using the get row command, I am going to use the get results function for this particular class right here. Now, the arguments for this function, get results, are exactly the same as they were for get row. You're providing your query and you're telling it how you want the information returned. So here's my query, and I want this returned as a named array. So I give it an array variable to store it as, and then I can output the information afterwards using the printr command, just so I can see exactly what this is doing. So running this code, you can see that I now have a much longer array being displayed on my page. And you may also notice that array is used more than once on this page. This is actually nested arrays. Right here I have an array which is contained within this first array. This array has a key name of 0. This is the first row result from my database. You can see the ID number right here is number 7. This was my top result here. I'm sorting in a descending order, just like you would see on this page here. So this would be my first result, and this would be my second result. Over here, this is my first result, and this is my second result. This is numbered with a 0, and this is numbered with a 1. These numbers would continue to count upwards for as many rows as I had within this particular database, or using this particular search especially. So these 3 or 4 basic WordPress class functions that I have shown you can be used to manipulate your databases in really almost limitless amount of ways. To actually show you a real working example of this, I have put together a somewhat lengthy example script for you guys, which you can find in the guidebook for this particular lesson. Now, this script is, I forget, 5-6 pages long or something within the ebook guide, but a lot of this script is actually nothing more than comments. To save time, obviously I don't want to sit here for the next half an hour and punch in this script for you guys, so I already have this entered into a web page for you. So I can explain some parts about it, and then I can show you how all of this actually works in person. So this is the complete script that I have. As you can see, I've pasted it into a WordPress page, the entire thing. Quite a bit of information all in here. Each different portion of the script, you can see I've added some comments in for you guys. All of this is in the ebook for you as well, so you can have a permanent reference to that. But what I want to do here real quick is just to walk through this script that I have put together for you guys and explain some parts about it, especially because there are a few random places throughout this script where I've used a new command or function that I did not previously use or explain. So I want to make sure that you guys understand everything that that I've actually done here. Now, to start out with, to use a working example of functions and show you how they could be used in a script, I've created a function up top here. Notice this function doesn't have any arguments, which means that I don't need any information passed to the function to be able to execute everything that is actually in the function. Now what this function does is it is retrieving all of these saved messages that are in my database. This example is going to be using this same database table that I created previously. So it's going to be using that same thing and pulling those messages back up so you can actually view them. Now, to accomplish this, since I'm pulling up all of the messages, I don't actually need information to do that. All I need to do is run a MySQL query to pull all of the existing messages from the database. So as you can see down here, I have created a MySQL query. I'm running this query right here, saving all of the results to an array right here by the name of rows. Then a little bit further down, I'm counting the number of results in this array, and I want to see if there are more than 0. Now, I want to find this out because if there are results, I want to do something with these results. And if there are not results, then I don't want to run all of this PHP coding for no reason whatsoever. So I'm using this test as a way to figure out whether the rest of this code in between this curly bracket and the corresponding curly bracket down here, I want to figure out whether all of this code in between it should run or not. And the only time it would run is if I have results to be displaying. So now, if there are results found, what I am doing is I am creating an HTML table, and I am loading that table into this variable right here called tempString. To start out with, the table, the information here up at the top of it, I am providing the different column names that I want to be showing up with this table. Now, as you can see, I've used thethead and tfoot HTML tags right here around my rows and my columns. The thead, there's a closing thead tag right here, and then a tfoot tag right here, and a closing tfoot tag. Everything in between the tfoot and the thead is actually identical to what's between the other one. So these are column names that are being displayed both above the table and the content of the table, and then again below the content of the table. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I want to process each of the different database results that were saved to this array right here. And to do that, I want to go through this array one piece at a time. And to do that, I'm using the for each command. I specify the array that I start with, rows, and then I use the word as, and then I specify a new variable name that will be used to store just that one portion of the array. Now, to show you how this works, let me flip back to this other page here where I listed the 2 arrays that were saved in the database. This entire array, everything you see on the page here, is what is getting returned as the rows array right here. Now, when I'm breaking it down into one row at a time, what I am assigning to just the row variable here is actually just the individual array. So it would be just this part of the array instead of the entire thing. So this allows me to cycle through my database results one at a time and process them each individually. Now, the next thing that I'm doing once I'm processing one of these rows is I want to turn that timestamp that I created into a real readable time and a date that everybody can understand. So I don't even look at timestamps, and I can't tell you what time a timestamp is just based on all those numbers. Even I need to be converting these to actually understand them. So this is how you accomplish that, by using the PHP command of date. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can format your dates. All of this text that I have highlighted right here, this text is what is actually formatting my date. There are tons of different ways you can do this, so I really don't want to explain all those different ways to you, but if you find that you want to format a date and a time in a particular way, go to php.net and search for the date command, and they have a listing of all these different letters that I've used here and what they mean and what they're going to display. All this is going to do is it's going to show the month, the day, a 4-digit year, a 24-hour time scale hour. So this will do like military time basically, because I'm not using an AM and a PM. And then it'll show the I, which is minutes, and then the S is for seconds. So this is going to show me the month, the day, the year, the hour, the minute, and the second of exactly when this message was saved into my database. Now, the next portion of my coding down here is adding to my string that I started creating up here. Notice right up here I have temp string, and I'm saying that it is equal to this string right here. Well, further down when I'm using temp string again, notice this period that I've used directly before the equal sign here. What this is doing is I'm not assigning a new value to this string, but I am adding to the value of this string. So the previous content that was saved in this string still exists. All I am doing is adding this content onto the end of the existing string that is already saved. So since I am looping through each of the database results right here, this will build on that string each time it loops through, and this is actually displaying all of the information for this particular result. You can see down here I'm showing the ID number, and then I output the ID number right here by referencing the row array and providing the column name as the array key to get the value of that was saved into my database. I'm showing the time here that I've created, the friendly readable time. And then I'm displaying the rest of the information, the name, the email, the comment, along with it. But you may notice right here another PHP function called strip slashes. What strip slashes does is, have you ever seen a website where you have a word typed in, for example, let's say like we're, with a quote within the word. And if you have ever seen a slash in front of a quote like this, that's actually the slashes that we are stripping out here. Whenever a quote is used in text that is then saved into the database, these slashes are automatically added to it by WordPress. So when you're removing text information from a database, you want to make sure to use this strip slashes command to ensure that those slashes are removed, or else they will simply show up within your text and make things look funny. Going a little bit further down, the string here, once all of my looping through the database results is completed, then I am simply closing off the table HTML tags that I was working on before. And now at the very bottom of this function, I am returning the value of this string to whatever called this function. See this closing bracket right here? This applies to this function. So all of this coding right here is all one function. So this is only going to get called when somebody calls this particular function by name right here. And then it will return the entire table HTML code for all of my database results as one simple string. Now, one more thing I need to point out. Notice at the beginning of my function how I pulled WPDB into the local scope of this function. But then once I go past the function down here, notice how I've used this global statement a second time on the same page. The reason why I have done this is because right here, this is not in a function on my page. This is just part of the script on the page. It's not in the function. So while I brought WPDB into the local scope of my function previously, it still does not exist out here in my normal script. So I need to call it in again here so I can use these database functions. Now, the next part of this script, I am setting some default values, which are all blank. These values right here are for the different pieces of user input that people can punch into the site. Now, the reason why I'm saving them as blank for default values is because when somebody first visits the page, I don't want there to be any default values in my HTML form that I'm going to have on this page. However, if somebody starts entering information into that form and tries to submit it before it is completed, then I don't want that information to be completely lost. So these variables exist so later on in the coding, I can save information to these variables and keep that information in my HTML forms. Now, I'll get to this a little bit later so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. These next default values that I'm setting, these variables here, these are simply messages that I'm going to display on this page. I have one set up as an error message and another one set up as a success message, which will be displayed in two different locations on the page depending on what is happening. Now, this last default variable that I have set is a list of all of the messages. This is set to blank because initially there will not be any results that are found. But then once this script processes, if it finds any database table results, it is going to save it to this particular variable, and then it will output that on my page. I will get to the coding that's controlling all of that here again just in a few more minutes. The next part of this coding is I'm using what are known as also global variables. This is the post global variable. Now, a post global variable exists when somebody has used an HTML form and submitted that information to your processing script. Your processing script then looks at all of the different form fields that you had on that page and the names that you gave each of those fields, and it can retrieve all of that information through this post global variable. Notice the underscore at the beginning of the variable name, and then it's just post, all in capital letters. And then you treat it like an array, and you can reference specific fields from your form. So right here, what I am doing is I am looking to detect if somebody has clicked on the Save button on this website. And then if they have clicked on that Save button, then it proceeds to the rest of this code all the way up through this closing curly bracket. Well, the code that is here to process, if that Save button is clicked, first of all, I'm looking at the other information that is on the form, and I want to make sure that this information isn't blank, because this is information that I want somebody to be entering in on the form, and I wouldn't consider it to be completed until all of this information is provided. So I'm running a test right here to ensure that none of that information is blank. Notice these double ampersand characters right here, the little and symbols. I've used 2 of them to separate each of these tests within this if statement right here. All this means is and. You can actually use the word and instead of these double ampersand symbols. It means the same exact thing. All I'm doing is saying I want this value, this variable, to not be equal to nothing. See, this is just 2 quote marks with nothing in between it. So I don't want this variable to be blank. But then I also don't want this variable to be blank and this one. So I have used these and symbols. However, you could also use or, where if just this or this was true, then it would pass and be able to make it through. Now the shorthand of or, it's not really any shorter, but it's 2 of these vertical lines. The backslash character on your keyboard, if you use the shift button with that character, it gives you these straight up and down lines. 2 of those up and down lines stands for or. Now after that, once I know that none of this information is blank, it gets me into this code right here. So I am taking the information submitted in the form and I'm saving it into my database. This is very, very similar right here to the example I gave you not long ago that used the query and the prepare functions to insert information into a database. This is almost identical to that. The only difference here is the data array that I've set. You can see that I'm putting these post variables into my data array for the name and the email and the comment. So this information is now truly user input information and not something that I have defined myself. So now if this is successfully called and information is saved to the database, then I set this message right here to get displayed on the site. This is one of the success messages that I was speaking about before. I'll show you exactly where this is getting displayed on the website here in just a minute. Now, if the information, if some of it ended up being blank and this failed, this else statement right here would end up getting fired. So all of this code right here would be processed if the form information was not complete. So when that happens, I am setting an error with a message so I can tell the website visitor exactly what is going on and what went wrong and how to correct it. Now, these variables right here, as you can see, I'm taking the post information that was submitted and I'm storing it into a local variable. These were these blank default variables that I was setting before. This helps to ensure that my form information is not lost when I can't allow it to be processed yet, and I still need more information from them. So this saves it to variables, so I can then display that information a little bit later on in my form, which, again, I will get to that in just a couple of minutes once I make it down to the form that is on this page. Now I'm also looking to detect if a delete button has been clicked. In the messages that are displayed, let me scroll back up top here real quick so I can show this to you. In this code that processes the database results and displays them in the table, you may have noticed at the very, very end of it, I actually included an HTML form. This HTML form, all it is doing is creating a delete button that people can click. And the cool part about this is that there's going to be a delete button for each database record that is showing up in this table. And when somebody clicks on a delete button, it's going to know exactly which message that delete button went with, so it can delete that message from the database. And it knows this information with this hidden HTML field right here. You may remember from the HTML tutorial how I mentioned that you could use hidden fields that included some type of information. This is why you use hidden fields. And I'm using that ID number because I know that every single row of information in that database will have this number, and it's going to be unique. This number never gets reused twice for any rows when you're using that auto increment feature in the database. So scrolling back down here, if somebody has clicked on this delete button, then all I want to do is simply remove that record from my database. Now, to start with, I want to verify, since I'm deleting information from my database, I want to be really, really sure that this is an actual request to delete the information and not somebody just trying to play around on my website and get it to start deleting stuff that it's not supposed to delete. So what I have done is I have picked up the posted ID number. Remember, this was from the hidden form field that I had up above, the ID number. Now, what I'm doing right here is I'm actually multiplying that ID number by integer, which is just basically saying that I want this variable right here converted into a whole number. Now, it's already going to be a whole number as long as this data actually came as a result of that button click. Well, this helps to ensure that there is no malicious code being contained within this variable, because I'm forcing it to be a whole number. If for some reason there was malicious code right here and it was converted into an integer, it would just end up as the number 0. So down below, I'm looking to see if my ID number is greater than 0, which means that it's a row in my database that actually exists. So once I know that the ID number that I'm trying to delete is a real ID number, then I process the database query to delete that. This is just using the delete from command, and then I provide the database table right here, and then I use the where command to search for the result that I want to delete. And the result that I want to delete is the my FID column, where my FID is equal to the value that I have posted here, which is saved right here. Now, as you may notice, I did not use the process class function for WPDB right here, because I've already verified my user input. My user input was this ID number, so I have ensured that this ID number is actually a real number by doing these steps right here. So I don't need to worry about using the prepare statement to ensure that this is not malicious code. So all I do is use the query command function with this class, and then I simply provide my MySQL query to process there. And all this will do is simply delete this one row from the database, and then I add in a success message to say that the delete went through properly. Now, the next part of my code here is I am calling a function and saving the results to this variable name. This function right here is the function that I created at the very beginning of this example, all the way at the top. So this is pulling these saved messages from the database and saving it to this variable name. Now, right here, as you can see, I have a closing PHP tag. So I'm saying right here that I'm done with my PHP coding. Everything above is PHP coding, and starting right here, it's not PHP coding. So this right here is actually my CSS coding. I have used a CSS style tag right here, so I can keep all of this information within one page just to make this easier to understand for the purposes of this tutorial. Uh-oh. Why is it doing that? Give me just a second, guys. Windows Explorer just crashed for some reason. Okay, I'm all set back up. Now, all of this CSS coding, this should be pretty familiar to you. I haven't done anything in here that I haven't previously demonstrated in the CSS tutorial from last week, so I won't take the time to actually go through all of this. But basically, all of this CSS coding is just changing the way that my page looks and the different parts of my page, the text, the background colors, the border colors, and so on. Now that I'm finished with my style coding right here, notice that I've actually opened up another set of PHP tags, which is then closed right here. Now, in reality, there's no need to actually have this right here. I just created this just to add in more comments here. There is a way to do commenting with HTML coding, but I just thought I would simply use the PHP method that I had already shown you because you should be familiar with it. I don't want to confuse you by giving you a ton of different ways to do commenting all at the same time. So this information is simply there just to tell you guys what is going on in this coding. Now, down below this, you can see that I have a div container right here. This is all HTML coding, but then within my HTML coding, I have more PHP tags. This PHP tag right here is actually using an if statement with a test. I'm looking to see if this error message variable right here is not blank. And if it's not blank, then I want to display this coding right here. Notice my opening bracket right here and my closing bracket right here, but then I've closed PHP coding right here as well. This bracket and this bracket still connect together even though the PHP coding is not connected together. So this HTML coding right here, which even has some more PHP coding on the inside of it, but this HTML coding right here will not get processed unless this PHP statement turns out to be true. So this is a way that you can intermingle your HTML and your PHP coding Like Will was asking a little earlier on tonight, you can actually use the PHP tags over and over and over again in your content to control the way that it works. This is how you create dynamic web pages that are different every time, depending on what the visitor is doing on your page, or maybe even depending on whether they're a member of your site or not, or depending on what day of the week it is, for example. You could do a wide variety of different things when it comes to using HTML and PHP programming together. So at the top here, this div container right here is actually my form that is going to be collecting information to save into the database. This form should be fairly familiar to you. It is, give or take, about the same form that I was using in the HTML tutorial a number of weeks ago, but I have enhanced it a little bit to go along with this lesson to include PHP coding. Notice on my inputs right here, input, this is a text box input by the name of my fname, so this is where people would enter in their name. For the value, I am echoing a PHP variable as the value of this HTML tag right here. Now, this PHP variable and this one and also this one, these are those three variables that I had set up earlier in my script, and I set them to a blank value. So ordinarily, when this page is visited, a blank value will get echoed as the value, simply because I don't want anything to show up there. However, the reason why this code is in place like it is as I had talked about before, if somebody doesn't completely fill out the form information, for example, then it saved that form information that they had already entered, and it puts them into these variables, and then it displays them in the form so that information is not lost. So it gives them a second chance at fixing all of the information and submitting the form properly as it was supposed to have been done. Now, all the way down here at the bottom, you can see that I have a submit button by the name of save, with a value of save, and by the name of my fsave. This was the save button click that I was looking for from that post value. I was looking for the value of this post variable, and that variable will only be equal to the value of save when this button right here gets clicked on the public website. So that is how I have detected when somebody is trying to save the information from this particular form. Now, going down to the bottom of the page here, I have some more PHP coding. This one right here is to display the success messages when they exist. If they don't exist, then it doesn't get displayed at all. And then down here at the bottom, this is going to be displaying the saved messages that have been pulled up out of the database on the site. When saved messages exist, when this string is not blank, then it displays it using this HTML coding. And when there are not any messages, then it shows a message right here to indicate that there are no saved messages. And I use a slightly different HTML coding just so I can make it look a little bit different. So I'm actually at the bottom of this script now. Of course, I've timed out again on my page, but I don't believe I made any changes here. So I can go and view this form on my live website. Now you can see everything right here within the content of my page. This has all been created by my coding. You can see up at the top here, I have my HTML form, which is asking for my name, my email address, and a message or some type of comment to go along with it. So I could simply type in my name right here and my email address right here. Now, just to show you the error message that I built in, if I didn't provide one of these pieces of information and left it blank and tried to save this and submitted it, you can see that it gives me this error message here telling me to fill out the entire form before I submit it. But then it didn't lose the information that I had already typed in. It keeps that information in the form for me, so I could just continue along with, where I was before, finish typing whatever I wanted to type, and then go back through and save it. So then when I save my message, then it's adding a success message right here and telling me that it was successfully saved in the database. Now everything down here, this is listing all of these saved messages from the database. Everything that shows up on this page right here in my database will then show up on my public website there. See, there are 3 messages in the database, and back on the public website, there are 3 messages here. Now, I'm getting the ID number for these messages, a date. You can see that this is the user-friendly, readable date and time that I created using the PHP command date. I turned that long series of numbers, the timestamp, into this readable date from just a series of numbers. I also show the name and the email address right here, and then the actual content of the message that was typed into the larger text box is shown right here. But then you can also see that I have a delete button set up over here. So I could remove one of these messages by simply clicking on the delete button. I click on delete, it tells me that it was successful, and then as you can see at the bottom, now there are only 2 messages showing up down there because I deleted the other one. Now, the practical uses of an example such as this, obviously, if you were collecting messages from your website visitors, you wouldn't want to also be showing them all of the saved messages on that page. This top portion would essentially be something you would use on a public web page, and then this back portion, this bottom portion here, is something that you would set up on a private web page on your site, something that you would just use as like your administration area so you could manage the messages that people have entered onto your site. So this would allow you to read the messages that people have saved, and then once you have taken care of it, perhaps responded to them by email, then you could just delete them off of your list here, and only the new messages would be showing up. This same concept of using a form to collect information, saving that information to a database, and then retrieving that information later and displaying it in a particular manner, this same concept is essentially the basis for 99% of website scripts that are out there, especially things like WordPress plugins. At heart, most of my WordPress plugins are kind of based on a system such as this, where I might have an administration page in my WordPress plugin. Maybe it's asking you to fill out a couple of settings that the plugin needs to be able to run properly. Same concept applies there. You're taking information from the user, you're saving it into your database, and then later you're calling that information back up and using it somehow. So this is pretty much the general concept, but if you can understand the basics and how I've actually done all of this, then you can expand from there and do pretty much anything you want to do with website programming and making your own interactive, customized websites. I think that is pretty much all of my planned content for the evening, guys. It looks like I'm about 45 minutes over schedule for the night, which is not a problem at all. I kind of expected tonight to end up longer than the others. But do you guys have any questions about anything that I've talked about tonight? Perhaps this complete example that I've put together, or maybe even how you could apply these concepts to something else that you have in mind to do on your own web pages. I'm going to stick around for just a little bit longer and give you guys some time to ask me some questions if you have them. If not, the final lesson in this particular series is going to be next Wednesday, also at 7 p.m. And next week I'm going to teach you guys how to actually do some troubleshooting and debugging on your websites. Sometimes you can run into problems on your websites that it may not even be a problem that you created. It could be maybe you purchased a plugin and it's conflicting with another plugin on your website. And, you know, maybe you just like to be able to fix that type of stuff yourself instead of outsourcing to have that fixed, or instead of having to wait for a developer to get back to you to fix a problem for you, for example. I'm going to show you a number of different ways that you guys can overcome these type of problems on your own websites next week. Let's see. Will says he hasn't been able to get anything to show on his page. Check says exec PHP is installed. Is there another setting I'm missing? The only other thing I could think of, Will, that you could possibly be missing is within your WordPress post or page, make sure you're on the correct tab here. You need to be entering PHP coding only within the text tab. You can't use this visual tab right here. Beyond this, if you are in the text tab and exec PHP is installed and activated and you still are just seeing your coding directly output on your live web page, if you're using something like Weaver as your theme, for example, these particular let's see, this particular setting here that I had talked to you guys about before to disable the auto paragraphs, for example, this what's called other processing right here that is pretty vague. This is actually referring to things like what exec PHP would be doing. That is other processing. So if you have this disabled within Weaver, for example, that could also be another reason why your PHP coding isn't directly showing up. Are you referring to next week, Stan, with the troubleshooting and stuff like that? I will be okay, yes. I will be going through some of the common things that will go wrong. But instead of just teaching like, you know, a generalized list of errors that you might see or whatever, I'm going to try to explain how to look at any error that you might see on your website, or how to find the errors that are on your website, and then how to figure out, based on the information that error is telling you, how to then fix the problem on your site and get everything working again as it's supposed to be. So I'm not necessarily going to be teaching a big list of common things that go wrong, but I'm going to try and teach the concepts behind troubleshooting and debugging, if that if that makes sense. Let's see, Will is just using 2010 theme. I'm not sure what Instabuilder is, Will. There is a possibility that another theme or plugin may be altering the output for that particular site. Without taking a look at it personally, it's hard for me to kind of say offhand. If you continue to have issues with that, would you maybe just send me an email and provide me the login information for your site, and I could, just log in real quick and take a look at your page and the plugin and the settings and everything you have set up, just to see if something stands out to me really quickly as the obvious reason for the problem. I won't be in there actually looking to make any changes or do any testing or anything like that. I would just be trying to put my eyes on it to actually try to figure out what the issue is to help you get everything running. Anybody else have any other questions, guys? I'll stick around for just a little bit longer and give you